This one is going to be a super fun, easy little DIY project that I'm going to share with you today. This here is my walkway from my kitchen to my walk-in pantry or butler's pantry, whatever you want to call it. Basically, I've got my pantry here. There is a bench and a sink, and we put our kettle and our toaster and all those little bits and pieces in the back here. And then the kitchen is out the front. But this space here is pretty much a bit of a boring space. There's not a lot that can be done with it, but I also don't really like that I'm not utilizing this space in any way. So today I'm going to be building a DIY storage rack on this wall here. So I'm going to be putting a panel on the wall and then building a really small shelf, so only about this wide, because I don't want it to stick out too much into the walkway. Then once I've got the shelf on, I'm going to put like a couple of bars across the front of it so that I can put some things in here and store them, like chopping boards and some nice sort of kitchenware that's always stored away in the cupboards that I would like to just get out and showcase. So that's what we're going to be doing in this video, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so the first step is going to be cutting down my back panel to size. So I've just purchased one large sheet because it's just going to be easier to attach that sheet straight to the wall. And you'll see that it's got the grooves or the inlays for the shiplap panel, and I'm going to have that running horizontal along the wall. So what I need to do is now get the measurements, and this piece is 2.4 high and my ceiling is just above 2.4. So I'm going to try and leave it and see whether we can fit it in. And I've then got the width measurements. So I need to cut 1.23 meters wide. So I'm just going to cut a little bit off the width of it, and then I'm going to carry it in, see what it looks like, and then see whether I want to take anything off the height. It's only 1200 wide. So I actually think we're just going to carry this sheet in and see whether it fits. Okay, so it does fit across that section just, but we also have a light switch that we need to work around, and I don't really want it to be the whole width of the section. I want to have a little bit on either side that's not the shelf. So I've decided that I'm going to take off 12 centimeters on each side. And so we are going to make this 1054 across. So I'm just going to mark out 1054, and then we're going to cut this down to size. You could leave it the full width if you wanted to, but for mine, I'm going to have it a bit smaller. So I'm just going to put a piece of masking tape along where that cut needs to go. I'm going to measure that again, then I'm going to get out my straight edge and put the actual line on, and then clamp on my straight edge so that I can use my circular saw to cut along that line to rip this down to size. And in case you're one of those people who sometimes leaves random questions like, why are you always wearing a puffer jacket? I will answer that one for you today, in that I live in country Victoria, and while it's not cold enough that we get snow, it is typically very cold. So at the moment it's about 6 to 7 degrees. And so I'm out here working in my garage, and typically whenever I'm working, I like to try and stay as warm as I can. So I am in my puffer jacket. I then continue to wear it when I'm inside my house, just because it's easier to keep it on and just keep working throughout the day. So that is why I'm wearing a puffer jacket. I'm one of the coldest people you'll ever meet. I'm always cold. So I've now gone through and just put a whole lot of little lines across this on the masking tape, and I'm going to get out my straight edge and just draw a line between those. Now, unfortunately, this piece of timber is really badly bowed. So you'll be able to see from my straight edge that it is not sitting straight, and there's quite a bit of bowing happening in the timber. But hopefully when we attach it to the wall, we will be able to circumvent that. Okay, so now that I've got my line that I want to cut along, I'm going to get this across so that it is not going to be in line with my workbench, so I can run my circular saw along this. I'm going to have to use a length of my material rather than my straight edge, because my straight edge is only 2 meters long. Then this is 2.4. So to make it a bit easier for myself, I'm just going to use a piece of timber. So I'm just going to put my safety gear on, because you should always be wearing safety gear when working with power tools. And then we're going to cut along this line. So now what I need to do is get the measurements of this light switch so we can cut out the hole for the light switch. What I'm going to do is just measure from the kickboard up to the light switch, and then we're going to measure to the top of the light switch from there. So we've got 111, and then from this side, go from the side of the panel, and we're going to go in the width of this, which is 11 centimeters. Because ideally what I'm going to do is just leave like a tiny strip, and then use my drill to do the corners, and then my jigsaw to cut out the gap where this is going to go. So I'm just going to get a screwdriver and undo these screws and pull this light switch out, and then push the switch through, so that then I'm going to be able to pull it out and put it back through the hole. And I need to measure the back side of this power point so I know how far it actually needs to go to be able to sit in there. I've had the power, or I've turned the power off before I do this. So I'm just simply got the power off, make sure there's no connection. I'm not actually changing any of the wiring. I'm simply pulling the face of the switch off and then moving it onto the front of this. But I wouldn't recommend you do this. My dad is actually an electrician, and I've spoken to him on the phone to confirm that if I've got the power disconnected, I can simply just pull this off, push this switch, and it's going to push out, and then I can just reattach this to the front without touching any of the actual wiring. So now all I'm going to do is just push this switch so it pops out through the other side, and then I can cut the hole for the switch to go through. Now, because I'm going to be putting this on the front here, I don't actually need a very big hole at all. All I need is something big enough that that's going to come through. So I'm just going to cut a little square based on those measurements in the center of this panel. Okay, so from the bottom of the panel up to the top of the panel, so it's 105 to the bottom. And then from the side, it's 16 to 20 in from the side of this panel. So I need to cut out this little square. So what I'm going to do for that is I am going to drill out the 4 corners, then get my jigsaw and just go in and cut out that little square. Now, some people would edit this out, but I think it's real to be straight with you guys and just tell you I made a mistake and stuffed up. So I did my measurements incorrectly for my panel, because I measured from the edge of the wall to where my power point needed to be, and that was 16 across. But I forgot that I'd left 12, or that I'd taken 12 off, and I was leaving a 12 centimeter gap from the wall because I cut this down to size. And so now I need to put my square over here, because I actually only need 4 centimeters here, because this starts at 16 across. So because I've got 12, I actually only needed 4, not 16 from the edge of my board. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just cut out the hole that I actually need, and then I'm going to paint this, and then when I attach it to the wall, I'm going to fill these holes, and then just paint over that filler. So you won't even notice that is there. But I think it's, good to show you guys that, even somebody who's been doing DIY projects for a long time often makes mistakes, and there's always a way that you can fix these things. So don't get disheartened if you make a mistake. So we're just going to go again in the correct spot. Okay, so now that I've got my little hole cut out and I've got my back panel cut down to size, I'm actually going to paint this backboard because I think it's going to be easier to paint before I add all the shelves and all of the other bits and bobs onto it, because the shelving that I'm adding is Tasmanian oak, and so it's actual beautiful hardwood timber, and I'm keeping the shelves the raw timber. This back panel is a pine board that I'm going to be painting. So I'm quickly going to just paint on a primer, let that dry for a little bit, paint on the first coat, let that dry, and then paint on the second coat, and then we're going to start building out the frame for the board. I think I'm actually going to sand this down just because it is a little bit rough in places. So I'm just going to get a 220 grit sandpaper and sand it down before I paint it. For the actual color, I decided to use the same color cream called Buff It Half that I've been using throughout the rest of my house. So it matches and we keep the same sort of colorings throughout the house. So I'm just going to paint the first coat of this onto the board now. As always, I'll link all of the products down in the description. So if there's like a specific color or a specific product that you need to find, all of those links will be in the description for you. So because the board is a shiplap board, I need to go along and use the paintbrush to paint in between all of those grooves, just because the roller has a bit of a hard time getting into all of those individual grooves. So I just go along with the paintbrush first and paint the groove, and then I go back with the roller and paint everything else. Remembering that I made that mistake with the holes, so I've just got to fill that in. And there's a couple of other little dints on this board that I'll probably fill in as well, and then patch those up after I've installed it. Okay, so time for the second coat of paint on the panel. You'll be able to see that where the paintbrush has applied the paint, it's a little bit thicker than where the roller has applied the paint in between. And so I can see all of those lines on this pine, and that is going to be very annoying. So I do not want to leave those lines there. So I'm going to be painting on one last layer. I'm wondering whether I even need to do the grooves again. I don't think I do, so I'll probably just use my roller and roll the second coat over all of the joins, over all of the large bits, I mean. I will get a little bit of paint just rolling this way anyways into those individual grooves, so this should be plenty sufficient for the third coat. You'll find that pine specifically absorbs paint in very different ways. So that's why when I'm working with raw pine, I usually always prime it because it will absorb in different ways in different parts of it. So you will see, you know, some bits it's looking a little bit shinier than other bits, or some bits might be a little bit thicker than other bits because the actual timber has started to absorb more of the paint. So if you do have an primed pine, like what I did my original board, I would definitely recommend priming it. Sometimes you can buy panels pre-primed. When I did my half wall panels in my house, I was able to buy a pre-primed version of those, so I did that to save myself having to prime them all when I was doing the wainscoting. Okay, so I've now painted on the third coat, or the second coat of the actual paint on top of the primer, and I'm just going to let that dry. And while that's drying, I'm going to cut down to size the sides and the top and the bottom to make the frame that's going to go around the outside of this. Okay, so I'm now going to cut the side pieces down to size. Now, typically they should, or ideally they should have been the right length, because the panel that I bought from the store was 2400, and then this length that I bought from Bunnings is also 2400, but sometimes they give you a little bit extra in the length just to make sure that you're going to have enough. So this is 2418. And I'm just going to take it down to 2403, which is the exact same size as the panel. So I just need to cut a little bit off the length of this. So it's the tiniest little bit that I need to cut off. And I need to make sure that I put my saw blade on the offcut side so that the actual length is exactly the length that I want it to be. Because I'm making like a frame or a picture frame, I need it to be the exact length. So I'm just going to get my safety gear and then we're going to cut this down. Okay, so in theory now it should be the exact right size. So it's still a smidgy too long, so we're just going to take the blade down the tiniest little bit and just take the tiniest little bit more off. One more time, it's better to cut a small bit off and then need to cut an extra little bit off than cut too much off. So I just need the tiniest little bit again. So once again, taking a small amount of this piece. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to build the frame. So I've got my two side pieces and then I've got my top and my bottom, and I'm going to nail that together through sides on the top and the bottom to attach the frame together. And then I'm going to attach the frame onto the front of the board and then nail it in from the back. So now, in theory, I need to put the backboard on. So I'm going to carry that and put it over the top, and then I'm going to come around from behind and nail it in. Once I'd attached the frame, I did decide to put a base coat of the filler in the holes where I'd made that mistake, and then I was going to put another coat on once I installed it to the wall. But before I install it onto the wall, I need to put the shelves and then also the guide rails on. So what I'm doing here is just taking the measurements and working out how many shelves I want and the distance that I want them to be apart. So I decided for 3 shelves. So you'll see here that I am installing those 3 shelves after I cut them down to size. To space them out correctly, I used a spacer, had the spacer in place, held it up against the spacer, and then nailed it in from the outside. Then once all the shelves were installed, it was time to cut down to size and install the little pieces that I'm going to call crossbars. I'm putting these crossbars on to be able to hold anything that I put in the shelves in place because it is so thin, and if I didn't have these bars on, whatever I sat there would just fall off the shelf. You can use your creativity here in terms of how many crossbars you want to put on, what shape you want them to be, what distance apart you want them to be. But I ended up settling for a slightly larger one just directly over the shelf and then 2 slightly smaller bars a little bit higher up. So I went the larger one first and then 2 slightly smaller ones, and I did the same for each of those shelves. This is such a great project to do anywhere in your home where you've got a really small space, but you want to add some detailing or even some storage, but you don't want to take up much room in your home. Okay, so the day is pretty much over, but I have finally finished adding all of the railings on. The guardrails are quite thin and they're only nailed from the sides, so there's not a lot of strength in them. Whereas the bottom piece I was able to nail in from underneath as well. So it has a little bit more strength when it comes to like holding the ornaments in place. So now I'm just going to carry this inside and attach it to the wall. And then I'm going to leave it for the rest of the day. And then I'm going to fill in the nail holes and add the clear coat of varnish tomorrow before I can put all of my ornaments in there. Okay, so I'm now going to carry it in and then apply the liquid nails onto the back of it and then attach it onto the wall and add a couple of brad nails in there as well, just to hold it in place while the liquid nails dries. But the installation process is going to be pretty dark because I've got to turn off the power so that I can reattach my light switch, and it's pretty much dark now. So I am going to leave the cameras running, but it's going to be a bit difficult to see this little bit. Okay, so I've now got it all installed to the wall after we did that last night, turned off the power and then installed it onto the wall. So today what I need to do is go through and fill in all the nail and screw holes from where I have attached it to the wall. And then I'm also going to use the wood filler to fill the holes on the ends where I attached the rails onto the board. So then once I've filled in all of those holes, all I need to do is put a clear coat of varnish over the timber and then put a little bit of paint over all of the little holes that I've added, just so it's looking really nice and clean and professional. And then I'm going to run back to Bunnings to get that clear varnish, because the varnish that I've already got is an oil-based varnish, which is going to take a long time to dry. So I just want to get a water-based clear varnish that I can put over all of this timber to give it a little bit of protection. But because it's not going to be sort of any heavy wear to this, it doesn't need to be super durable and that oil-based paint. So I'm just going to run to Bunnings, get some more, and then we'll be able to finish this off and style it. I used the Monarch multi-purpose filler to fill in all of the nail holes from where I attached this to the wall, and then also those drill holes that I put in the wrong spot. I did another coat of those to make it as smooth as I possibly can. So then once I add the paint, you're not going to see that mistake anymore. I then swapped over to the hardwood wood filler for the timber, because as I mentioned, I'm keeping this raw and exposed and I can't have a white filler in there or it's going to look terrible. So I needed to get a hardwood filler that was the same color as the Tasmanian oak timber that I used. So you're not going to be able to see all of those patches once I add the varnish. I also added a bead of no more gaps where it attached to the wall so that there was no gap in behind the back of this panel that I've attached. And then I'm just going to go through and sand off all of the excess wood filler and also the extra filler in the actual panel. And then I'm just going to paint the timber with the clear varnish and then run some paint along over the top of that filler that I've added so that it looks seamless. I just cut this in freehand because I've done a lot of painting before and know that I have a fairly steady hand when it comes to cutting in. But if you're at all worried, you could just add some masking tape before you paint that line to get it perfect. Then once the paint was all dry, I was able to finally put my ornaments all in here and style this shelving so that it's got a real wow factor when you're walking through this hallway. I hope you've enjoyed this video and watching me create this fun little storage rack. Honestly, this is such a great DIY project for anywhere in your home really, where you're wanting to add a little bit more interest or a little bit more storage, but you don't want it to take up very much space into the home. If you love home transformations and DIY projects, hit the subscribe button and then you can follow along on all the projects I'm working on. I'll see you in the next video. If you like projects featuring raw hardwood timber, check out this video I did of my son's bedroom where I did a raw timber feature wall.